As Washington, D.C.'s central library, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library serves D.C. residents from every neighborhood and culture in our city, with offerings ranging from makers' labs to town halls, co-working to concerts. We go well beyond books. Here, artists and activists, teachers and learners, toddlers and seniors converge to explore our city's past and the infinite potential of its future. Because the MLK Library is not only a place to be quiet, it is a place to be heard, to be understood. It is a place to explore the possibility of all we can be, and it is a place to just be. Welcome to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, celebrating 50 years as Washington, D.C.'s first memorial to Dr. King.
It's so exciting to be here. It's always exciting to be back at the MLK Library. It's always exciting to be partnering and doing stuff with Loyalty. I live like 5 minutes down the road from them. I am their BFF. They're probably tired of me, but it's my favorite bookstore in the game, and I'm so glad that DC Library continues to partner with Loyalty and continues to allow me to be in conversation with incredible folks like Ross. And one of the reasons I love these things is because, and this has been exacerbated by the pandemic, but Ross and I, the last time we saw each other, I think was in 2017,
Yes.
which is like 5 years ago, which is, I don't
16.
think
It was 16.
It was 16.
Mhm.
I didn't have kids, which I don't even
Right.
remember life before that.
Yeah.
Like, it's all just blurry. I was like, what did I do with all that free time? And I've been, since then, sort of watching from afar. And I said this, I tweeted this out when this event was announced, but like Ross is one of my favorite writers in the world, is a constant source of inspiration to me, both in the sort of the skill of his literary projects, but also the sort of artistic and moral ethics that he lives by, and that manifests itself through his art. So I'm excited to be in conversation with him, and I'm excited to hear him read a little bit, and then we'll be in conversation.
Great. Yeah, same here. Like, I feel lucky to be talking to you, because I remember we were in a place called Clover.
Clover, that's
Which
true.
is like a little restaurant. They have
Yeah.
bring all their local food. They have very good falafel, very good French fries.
Any place that has good French fries is a good place to
That's
be.
a good place to be. Yeah. And you were at the very beginning of this,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's just been amazing to kind of watch also and admire what you're up to and what's coming too. Beautiful book of poems coming and everything else. I'm going to read just like a little bit from the introduction, if that's okay. Okay. Thank you. That's what I needed. This is called The First Incitement. I've had the good fortune in the past several years, since shortly after the publication of my third book of poems, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, and probably again with my book of essays, The Book of Delights, to have had numerous and sustained conversations about joy. These conversations might begin during question and answer sessions, in interviews, or even in the book signing line. I'll never forget a woman at a reading in a public library in April of 2016 in Claremont, California. One of those weird, beautifully. Also, MLK Library, thank you for having. This is so kind of you to have me. And it's a beautiful library. Golly, I've been to DC a million times, but I haven't been here, so I'm so lucky to be here now. Yeah. I'll never forget a woman at a reading in a public library in April of 2016 in Claremont, California. One of those weird, beautifully ugly 60s California buildings. It was a rancher of a library, maybe with some faux stone on the front, maybe white brick. I suspect she was in her late 60s or early 70s, and as she asked me to inscribe catalog, she was crying, just a little, not very able to talk. And she said, quietly, wiping her face, "I didn't know you could write about joy." Or another time, this one from an undergrad at a reading I was giving, who about midway through a Q&A said something along the lines of, "I've always been told that you can't write about joy because it's not serious." And a professor at another school asked, as much for the benefit of his students as it was a challenge, though that might be giving him the benefit of the doubt, which I'm practicing doing more of. When all this is going on, he held his hands up as though to imply war, famine, people all over the world in cages or concentration camps, some of them children, disease, sorrow immense and imperturbable, it only getting worse and worse and worse. Dude had big hands. Why would you write about joy? The implication, of course, is that joy does not have anything to do with everything in that guy's big hands, or even that joy is the opposite of what's in there, which I guess is a reasonable notion, given how joy is often imagined to be the result of organizing our closets and bookshelves, or getting the new Tesla, or winning the big game, or acing the test, or getting a promotion, or getting our dishes sparkling clean. Given that joy is often imagined as the result of some accomplishment or acquisition, something nice you get out there and do, something nice you go get yourself. Joy, the thinking goes, is that room at the top of a flight of stairs that, upon entering, washes you with clean air and glad music and comfy furniture and gentle warmth emanating from the white pine floors, suffused with light pouring in from the enormous windows with a sweet window seat where you can read a happy book. The joy room, the thinking goes, is snug with every good and nice and cozy thing. Oh, too, this is very important. This sanctuary of joy has a very strong lock. Think Tom and Jerry. Is that generational? Do like the younger people? No, okay. Okay. Ubiquitous. Think Tom and Jerry, 10 or 15 latches and deadbolts and chains and the rest. For when heartbreak, which, it should be noted, usually lives in the filthy back corner of the back room of the basement, where the stone walls are always wet and flickering with roaches and the drain with the furry green stuff crawling from it never all the way screws down, gets loose and comes sniffing around the keyhole, throttling the door, trying to get in. Perhaps in the form of your father dead, or your mother despondent, or your cousin who shot herself in the chest, or your buddy stabbed to death, or your dutiful and troubled mind, or the most beautiful ball player you ever coached at last let off the machine, or your child who won't forgive you, or you can't get your medicine, or your beloved doggie's cough won't stop, or the forest you love has been logged, or the school shut down, or they poison the water again, or they put a highway through again, or another species gone again, or it's raining in Greenland, or, You get my point. It's a kid's fantasy by which we grown-ups seem as seduced as plenty of kids to imagine any emotion discrete from any other. But it strikes me as a particularly dangerous fantasy, by which I also mean it is sad, so goddamn sad, that because we often think of joy as meaning without pain or without sorrow, which, to reiterate, our consumer culture has us believing is a state of being that we could buy. Not only is it sometimes considered unserious or frivolous to talk about joy, i.e., but there's so much pain in the world. But this definition also suggests that someone might be able to live without, or maybe a more accurate phrase is free of, heartbreak or sorrow, which I'm pretty sure you only get to do if you have no relationships, love nothing, are a sociopath, and maybe if you're enlightened. I don't know about you, but I check none of those boxes. But what happens if joy is not separate from pain? What if joy and pain are fundamentally tangled up with one another? Or even more to the point, what if joy is not only entangled with pain or suffering or sorrow, but is also what emerges from how we care for each other through those things? What if joy, instead of refuge or relief from heartbreak, is what effloresces from us as we help each other carry our heartbreaks? Which is to say, what if joy needs sorrow, or what Zadie Smith in her essay, Joy, calls the intolerable for its existence? If it sounds like I'm advocating for sorrow, no. Besides, sorrow, unlike joy apparently, doesn't need an advocate. Given as, to quote the visionary blind man Pozzo in Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot, were born, quote, astride a grave, i.e., we and everyone and everything we love will one day, maybe today, die. I think sorrow is going to be just fine. Like Gwendolyn Brooks says about death, one of sorrow's chauffeurs, it's, quote, just down the street, his most obliging neighbor can meet you at any moment, end quote. Or as the Jackson 5 sing, not in the voice of sorrow, but kinda, I'll be there. But what I am advocating, and adamantly so, is that rather than quarantining ourselves or running from sorrow, rather than warring with sorrow, we lay down our swords and invite sorrow in. I'm suggesting we make sorrow from some tea from the lemon balm in the garden. We let sorrow wash up and take some of our clothes. We give sorrow our dad's slippers that we've hung on to for 15 years for just this occasion. And we drape our murdered buddy's scarf, still smelling of Nag Champa, over sorrow's shoulders to warm them up some. We wedge some wood in the fire. As we're refilling their tea, we notice sorrow is drinking from a mug given to us by someone we've hurt. We ask sorrow about themselves, and we scooch closer to hear. We eventually decide to invite a small group of friends over for a potluck because we want sorrow to meet them. Sorrow says, maybe more than just your closest friends? So we add to the list a couple acquaintances from work, the supermarket. We put our mechanic on the list, our chiropractor, and the neighbors we wave at, but not much more than that. And when sorrow asks, what about that guy of someone you really don't like? After thinking, how'd sorrow know that? You say, I hate that dude. Sorrow says, better invite him too. Damn, okay, you say. Looking over your shoulder as you're growing the invite list, sorrow nudges you in the arm and says, maybe just invite anyone with some sorrow to bring along. Couldn't be too many people. Besides, sorrow says, looking around at your little house, this is a good-sized place. So we open it up. Bring a dish and bring your sorrows. We prepare a few staples with which sorrow helps. A keen eye sorrow has for the tenderest leaves of dandelion and the volunteer mustards frilling the edge of the compost pile. Easy, too, your sorrow with kneading and shaping up the sourdough. Your sorrow even roots around in the antique cabinet you never look in anymore for how bad it hurts, and pulls out your mother's handmade placemats, quilted and embroidered with everyone's initials. Let's use these, sorrow says, clapping them together to get the dust out. And when the guests start showing up, just as your sorrow is pulling the loaves of bread from the oven and you're dressing the salad, at first it's just a few people, nodding and smiling shyly when you wave them in. This is the place, yep. And then a few more ring the doorbell, and then they start coming in twos and threes and squads and families. So you just keep the door open, front and back, because they are coming in droves, walking up the hill toward the house on the north and coming through the woods from the south. And the house is already too full, way too full, you think. But everyone squishes in, and it somehow never quite fills up, bringing their dish and their sorrows. Some of them obviously old pros at the potluck, looking for a place to put their dish. These ones even bring their own plate and utensils with an index card with the ingredients, if it has nuts or gluten or dairy. See? And some guests with just a box of cookies or a bag of chips or a 2-liter they got at Kroger on the way over. And some, of course, forget the goodies, but at this potluck, no one forgets their sorrows, which they introduce to each other. You can just barely hear it over how loud it is. I'd like you to meet my sorrow, we holler to each other, dipping the flatbread into the hummus, or eating the kimchi with our fingers because the forks are long gone. Good to meet you, we shout, smiling and nodding at the sorrow, who also smiles and nods and half shrugs and raises their eyebrows. This is mine, we yell, pulling the spoon from the dal we're eating to point at our sorrow, who takes a bite from the lentils and laughs. Well done, sorrow. Everyone jostles that sorrow, and he leans up against who he came with. And around those oatmeal raisin chocolate chip cookies gathers a gaggle of guests and their sorrows, giggling and pretending to fight over the last cookie before one of the sorrows breaks it into 10 pieces and they all take their bite from sorrow's hand, moaning like a choir. It goes on like this, growing louder and more raucous and ramshackle, this potluck of sorrows. A lamp gets knocked off the table. A jade plant topples from the mantle, its clay pot splintering into shards that a few people promptly set about cleaning up, then getting the plant repotted. The dog gets stepped on and the cat steering clear, looking in from the beech tree out front. It's not long before someone breaks out the cards in the kitchen, and a few other people rummage the fridge and pantry, wanting to try to make those delicious oatmeal cookies. A few people in their sorrows run out to the garden to grab some cabbages and carrots and give an impromptu sauerkraut workshop. There are some kids playing wall ball in the kitchen, marking up the plaster. And when two of them stumble into each other and knock heads, and they start shoving, then throwing punches, an old woman in her sorrow jump between them and shout, "Where the hell are your sorrows?" The kids point with their chins over the tarot table, and the old woman marches over there, grabs their sorrows by the elbows, and shoves them toward the kids. They seem to work it out. There's a crew with their sorrows by the stove watching the chai and singing Jodeci's cover of Stevie Wonder's Lately in perfect four-part harmony, which the dog joins in on. I think I hear it right that a squad with their sorrows standing outside the bathroom is going to make a scooter gang, and a flock of folks with their sorrows, a coven. A newfangled poultice posse is macerating plantain and comfrey from out back with the mortar and pestle. Some elders and youngers are sitting with their sorrows in a circle, crafting kites out of the obituary pages of the newspaper. And another group is sitting on the ground in front of the wood stove, which stays stocked and burning. And they are doing that levitation trick where everyone puts a finger or two under the person. You remember that? Me and my sorrow elbow each other and are like, "Yo, check this out." And no way. Because dude isn't small. Like, really not small. And neither is his sorrow, who is sitting cross-legged on dude's chest. And don't you know, they lift him and his sorrow like they are just about nothing. And dude's face, which looked kind of somber at first with his eyes closed, just slides into a big surprised smile. And his eyes pop wide open. And after he gasps, he actually cackles up there. I mean, he cackles so hard he cries. Then they kind of drop him and catch him, and they're all laughing and crying, and the thud skips the record back to the beginning of Sly Stone's Family Affair, and the dancing, which has been intermittent, just blasts off. All of us in our sorrows, sweaty, stomping and shaking, tearing it up, the pictures falling off the walls, the books from the shelves, some logs ablaze, even spilling from the stove. Riotous, this care, this carrying, this incitement, this joy. I'll stop there.
So right after you go buy the hardcover from Loyalty right after this, you should also download the audiobook. One, because, I mean, listen to this voice. I mean, I wish it could put me to sleep every night. But also there are these incredible moments where like Ross just starts laughing, like in the middle of a chapter. And it's like, I'm so glad that the editor didn't cut that out, because you're just like reading and then you're like, you just like laugh for like 5-10 seconds. And it's just like, it's just so contagious, it's so great. And I was like, dang, I need to go back and put some laugh tracks on my book. But it's, the book is great, audiobook is great. And to build off of, you know, what's the sort of thesis that you bring to the fore in that first section, you know, part of what you're saying, as I understand it, is, right, we have to, it's not joy at the expense of sorrow or in lieu of sorrow, it's that these things sit together, right, in the world, that these things sit in proximity to one another. And one of the things that's so interesting about this book is that there are essays that I think one could call it a departure in some ways from Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, from Book of Delights. But if we're to understand your thesis, it's not actually a departure, it's a sort of building on, right? To understand that if we're truly to understand the sort of totality of what joy is, then we also need to take seriously the sort of manifestations of sorrow that sit alongside it. And part of what that looks like is thinking about that in the sort of emotional texture of that, but you also talk about the sort of physical manifestations of that and the way that, you know, places that are representative of joy and of sorrow kind of sit in such close proximity to one another. You have a section where you talk about Rikers, and what it means and how interwoven Rikers has become as part of the landscape. And I had this moment where I was thinking of, you know, like in the neighborhood where Rikers is, in these other places that are filled with otherwise or sort of manifestations of oppression or violence or dilapidation, there's also inside of those spaces and proximate to those spaces are like profound examples of joy, right?
Totally.
A profound example of people who are creating meaningful, beautiful, robust lives and memories and moments in the midst of unfathomably difficult conditions. Can you talk a little bit more about the sort of proximity of those two things alongside one another?
Yeah. And I think that in ways there's always, I mean, it's just like always the case that, and I love how you put it, like in proximity to these sites, and sometimes they're memorials, or tributes in a way to brutality. Always in the midst of that, and always in the seams are these sort of are these refusals, I think of, actually. The refusals of the brutality that those things signify, and maybe that those things are derived from, and maybe even that those things kind of continue to enact in a certain kind of way. But my sort of premise is that, and it's not my premise, it's sort of what I've been given. Like people talk about epigenetic trauma all the time. People don't talk about epigenetic joy. Yeah. There can't be one and not the other. Like, and partly the joy to me, which entails the brutality and the sorrow, et cetera, is that people got here, So anyway, that feels like it's, I mean, I love the question in for many ways, because it's sort of like a psychological or emotional space, proximity in a certain kind of way that you're talking about. Like sorrow and joy are not discrete from one another. Right. Sorrow does not exist, as far as I think of it. Yeah. It doesn't exist absent sorrow. That's something else. If, given that we have many common things, but heartbreak, my sense, is a big one. Like you scratch a little bit and everyone's brokenhearted. But I also, and I did a thing yesterday with the amazing writer, poet, essayist, et cetera, Simone White, and she said this question, this is such a good question. She was like, is that a value? Is it a value to believe that everyone's heartbroken? I thought it was such a fucking brilliant question. That has me going. But anyway, so there's the kind of emotion.
Well, you can't put that brilliant question out there and then not answer.
I sure can. I offer it to you. You tell me to answer that one. But it's a good question. But so there's the kind of emotional space, so the emotional, emotional spatial thing that to me, they're tangled up. But also when you're talking about, again, like sort of physical spaces, I think that's interesting too. Because also in this book too, there's quite a little bit of considering physical space. There's an essay about like basketball courts, and there's an essay about, which to me, like pickup basketball, not with coaches and stuff, pickup basketball, feels like a site where all of these sorts of practices of care, practices of making space are underway, are being constantly sort of emerging and re-emerging and being revised. Skateboarding. Skateboarding to me is like, one of the reasons skateboarding is, a crime. Do you all remember the sticker, skateboarding is not a crime? You have a sticker like that because skateboarding is a crime. And partly because one of the practices of skateboarding is like taking the shit that got stolen. It's like taking it back. The stealing itself being kind of the physical manifestation of, or the evidence of, the brutality. You know what I mean? And that might just be like a bank, or it might be something else. But the practice in a way is to sort of be like, there's all this stuff that they don't want to share. We're going to share it anyway.
One of the things that you're thinking a lot about and sort of wrestling with too is, and what you're doing, you're sort of pushing back against notions of time and like time as being inextricably linked. There's a lot of critical engagement with capitalism in the book, which I thought was so important given your thesis. And one of the things that you do is sort of reject the idea. It's like so much of the book, and sometimes you don't even say it explicitly, but it's like the essence of the book is a rejection of the notion that we always have to be thinking about how to productively use our time, right?
Yeah.
And that sense that so many of us are entangled in, to feel like we have to be maximizing our time and our output and using our time productively, both professionally and then for our sort of personal growth. Like if the thing you're doing is not going to contribute to your personal, intellectual, or social mobility or development, then like, what are you doing? Why are you? And it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about like trying to be intentional about how to do things that have nothing to do with any notion of like my professional or intellectual or artistic life.
Yeah.
And it can be hard
Yeah.
because as a writer, I love to read and
Yeah.
I love to write. And these are things that bring me an immense amount of joy.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're also work.
Yeah.
And so I've had a hard time figuring out what it looks like to not do things that are even like remotely adjacent to this feeling of like, you know, even when I'm not a novelist, but even when I'm reading a novel, it's hard to turn off that thing. And so it's interesting because you're talking about basketball, and I find that for me, the site of that more than anything is the soccer field.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Playing and watching?
Playing and watching. Yeah. So like on Thursday nights, I play in like an old man's league in DC, and it's cool because like the people that I play with, we don't really have a relationship to one another outside the context of the soccer field.
Yeah.
But like every Thursday night, it's like, and the games are all at like 9 or 10 p.m. because we all have kids, and so we got to put our kids down, and then people drive to the field, and so you know we're playing while like a lot of the world is going to bed. But it's just that place has nothing to do with anything else in my life, and it's so fulfilling in ways that I don't think I fully understood until recently as being so fulfilling, because it had, you know, it didn't matter what I wrote, it didn't matter where my book was or what it was doing, it didn't matter. It was just like me and some soccer playing acquaintances who were like on the field doing our thing. It's when I watch Arsenal and sort of like lose myself in the game in the same way I did when I was 13 years old. Is basketball, like, what are those spaces? I have a sense of what they are, but what do those spaces look like for you?
Well, the thing that I want to say though, like hearing you talk there, and when you said like I think you said you lose yourself, and it's sort of plain, but it's worth saying. And someone said it to me, or we were having a conversation, and we came to it, which is that I think one of the things about joy is that it seems to me, you know, it's a nice thing to sort of theorize about joy. You know, like a lot of people theorize about misery, and one of the things about joy is that it seems it's one of the qualities or features of joy is that it's kind of that thing, like losing yourself into something else, you know, becoming, realizing or falling into something larger than yourself often is maybe the way to think of it. And so playing on a team, even if you don't like, like a lot of my favorite teams, people, they didn't know my last name.
Yeah.
If they knew my first name.
The teams you played on.
Like adult, you know, men's league, it's like, Beast, we got a game at blah, 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 you know, and I'm like, all right.
It's like, we have a WhatsApp, and it's like, who's going to be there at 8 o'clock?
And there is a way that it's a kind of like, you all want to win your games, you all want to make beautiful stuff, I think, is partly. But there's also a joining that is part of the thing. It's a joining, it's play is, you know, a feature of play is joining, J-O-Y-ning. But I also, I think that's part of it, that joining something. For me, you know, like, pickup basketball is very much that. And it's also interesting how that is evolving as I get older. You know, I'm 48, you know. And I feel like I'm more and more and more, in a way, invested is a very wrong word, but like in love with the game, enamored of the game, and less, you know, like all the same stuff. Like, you know, I grew up playing sports like you. I play hard, you know, but there's a kind of a beauty to submitting to the game that is really what I'm interested in, and those moments of beauty where the game sort of disappears and you just sort of are in the midst of something. Or no, you disappear and you're in the midst of the game, I think maybe, is really an amazing thing. Gardening to me is one of the places for sure where that happens, you know. And it's so, in a way, it's just like, you know, such a lucky place to study this thing of like belonging to something larger than you could ever conceive of. You know, like a basketball team is a good way to practice that, but like a garden, if you're practicing, by which I mean if you're not like at war with your garden, you're just asking questions. You're just like asking questions and you're expressing gratitude again and again and again. You're just like, I'm like, how kind of you, son. It's a big one. You know, how kind of you, rain. How kind of you, groundhog. How kind of you, on and on and on. Which again, like that's sort of to me, like one of the places to practice that kind of joining. Teaching's another place, you know, classroom. I feel like the more I learn how to teach, the more that becomes a space where those boundaries of the discrete, accomplishing, ambitious, et cetera, self get subdued to some extent more in sort of toward this other thing, toward this getting closer to people.
Do those feel like different types of joy, or is there a sort of overlap between? Because you know, a pickup basketball game is a sort of maybe you experience an individual joy, but amid a collective joy, right? A collective project. Whereas gardening, I guess there are different ways to garden, right? You can garden in a group, you can garden individually. But if you're in your yard, so to speak, then it's more of an individual project. Like, does that feel?
That's different? The thing. Like, that's the thing. What I'm talking about too is like when the gardening feels flush like that, it doesn't feel individual at all. Gotcha. It feels very much like, you know, you are really co-gardening with the bees.
Gotcha.
You know, like the sort of, you know, it's like there's 5 people on the team, on the basketball team, and in the garden there's like a zillion people on the team. Yeah, there's like a zillion people on the team. You know, when I'm doing it right, and that's kind of a remarkable thing. And it's also kind of amazing to be like, man, the way this garden is happening, I will never be able to understand. I'll never understand it, you know. Just like my own body. I'll never understand my own body fully. Or the body of the 4 other people on a team, or the 10 people on the court. But a garden, you know, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and you have a section where you talk specifically about gardening. You talk specifically about this community garden that you're trying to build with your neighbors and the folks in your community. And I imagine this was pre-pandemic because everything was in person, and so. But I was struck. Speaking of, I was struck by, you know, you talk about we all came together, and I think I'm getting this right, but like you were like, we need a community, we need a place where people can come and get vegetables and continue to reject capitalism, and that only certain people should have access to certain types of healthy food, and you intentionally use this word disprivilege, right, as to sort of flip the idea that only certain people, that it is in fact like it should be a right to everyone to have access to vegetables and to fruit and to healthcare and to, you know, the list goes on, and to not have those, it's not a privilege necessarily, or shouldn't be understood as a privilege to have those, but rather a disprivilege to not have them, right? To put the onus on the systems that strip those things away from people, which I thought was such an important sort of like intervention with your nomenclature. And but you talk about, so y'all get together and you create this community garden, and it becomes like a governing body in some way, and you meet once a week for like 3 hours, and which sounded overwhelming to me.
It's too much. It's too much. Yeah, it's great. It's the best.
Like,
it's the best.
And it's crazy because I was like, man, I wonder if there's like a Zoom option. Like, I wonder, can I Zoom into the meeting?
Yeah, totally.
But part of what you were talking about was, and part of what made the thing so important was the sort of like the texture of the group, and
Yes.
like people bringing food, and like
Yes.
people, it becomes a potluck, and
Yeah.
everybody's bringing different types of
Yeah,
food and trying
yeah.
each other's soup, and
Yeah.
where'd you get these tomatoes,
Yeah.
and like that is a fundamental, if not, it eventually kind of becomes the biggest
It's the-
part of that
Yeah.
thing. And so I was thinking about that, and I was like, man, so many things like that were taken away from us
Yeah.
during a pandemic,
Yeah.
right? It's like to try to, all of those meetings, I don't know if you all continue those meetings, but started to happen over Zoom.
Right.
And it just, and it's interesting because there's a sort of tension for me where I'm thinking about the value of this like emotional texture of being in the same physical space and proximity to these people who are engaged in this same project, this collective project,
Yeah.
and how important that is. And then also thinking about the ways that, you know, for all the ways that Zoom is impersonal and doesn't allow for you to sort of bring your soup to the meeting, also opens up sorts of access for certain people to participate in these things who might not otherwise. People who might have kids,
Yeah.
people who can't get a babysitter for 3 hours,
Yeah.
people who just got off work,
Yeah.
people who, and so I'm wondering how you think about the balance between like something like that, where it's like access, providing as much access to as many people to participate in the commons, as you
Yeah.
say, as possible, but also, but how do you weigh that with the potential of losing the very thing that makes said commons so valuable?
Yeah, yeah, I love that question. It's a good, hard question. And yeah, like, so this community orchard is started by a woman named Amy Countryman, friend of mine, and she just basically, you know, did a undergraduate thesis. She was an older, you know, undergraduate student, but she did a thesis where she studied the urban canopy in Bloomington, where I live. That means the trees managed by the city. And none of them made fruit, basically. None of them made food. So it's just like found out, like probably like most cities. Although I did see that you all have like serviceberry plantings along the road. I've noticed that. Which is just like a reasonable feature of urban planning, to have like food producing plants around. And water fountains, like in the train station. That's so nice. But so she had this,
Are there no water fountains in Indiana?
they got them somewhere. I've heard about a water fountain. No. But actually, you know, like the public water fountain in like at the train station, in Union Station, like that, that's more like Rome. It's beautiful, you know, and they're beautiful. You know? Yeah, you should go check it out
Okay,
again.
I'm
I
into
know.
it.
See, you're spoiled. You're spoiled.
That's the thing about Ross Gay. So it's like, Clint, look at the water fountain. You're like, damn, look at the water fountain.
That is nice.
It's a nice ass water fountain.
But anyways, and she had a call-out meeting. A bunch of people came, and you know, like, and we kind of turned into these like teams, and it was very like intentionally non-hierarchical, and there were elders and youngers, and like, you know, multi-generational, and it was wild, and it was, and it was profoundly inefficient. It was profoundly inefficient. It was like, you know, there were, you know, a lot of folks had kids, you know, like single parents, you know, and it was so. This is what I want to say. I love that the question of like, yes, not everyone can make everything, and you know, some of like saddest stuff for that would be like someone who back then was like, so are we only going to communicate over email? Because I don't do email, and that sucked, you know. Now it'd be like, are we really going to get together? You know? But I do think there is that important thing about like, how is it possible to have, you know, to make it possible for as many people to participate. At the same time, there is something about the jangly, sloppy inefficiency that I don't think that project would have been, it would not have been nearly as magical without that. The fact that people were getting together in tight spaces, bringing food, sharing recipes, asking how's your kids, being like, okay, you know, my partner can watch your kids next week. Like all of the stuff that has to happen for us to get together, which is not just showing up mainly, especially if you get older. It's like showing up and taking care of all your other shit. Requires that we're practicing being dependent on other people. So in a way, it's sort of just expanding the circle of our dependence. which the orchard in a way is a sort of, I would say it's a kind of tribute to that as a possibility. Like how can we celebrate our dependence, our being independence of each other. But also, it's funny, like when you're talking about how the difficulty or how difficult it can be to not be being productive or something. For some reason, and then like how pleasurable it can be to be on a team, I was thinking about like alienation. I was thinking that it seems like the work that you do, your writing, is probably not particularly alienating. I don't know. We haven't talked about it, but it seems like you get meaning from it. But there is a way that I think a lot of the kind of discourse or requirement of being productive is profoundly alienating. In part because it makes us, the meaning of our lives, it tricks us into thinking the meaning of our lives is like what we make, as opposed to like how we love or something, or...
And those messy moments in the community orchard meetings.
Totally.
Yeah.
So those messy moments, like how we can be with one another. And so that's why I'm like, I fucking hate Zoom, but I appreciate it, Like I gave a lot of readings last year, and I was glad to like get to be with people. And sometimes people had a reading where they wouldn't have been able to come, for any number of reasons.
I appreciate that one was bubbling up in there for a minute.
I know, that took like 5 minutes to say it. But I am so, I'm going to tell you one more story. And the other day I was walking down the street in my town, and there's a dude, lovely dude, and he was like, I was like, hey, how's it been going? And you know how you say how's it been going, meaning like how's it been going this last 2 years, And he was like, he works in PR, and so it's, business is fine, good even. And he said, he said he was, they're doing PR for like NFTs. And I was like, okay, what's an NFT? And then I asked, and he told me, and I didn't know what that meant either. And then he talked about like some concert that they were doing the PR for, and like the people were going to get together at the concert and put on virtual reality helmets.
The metaverse.
The metaverse, man. And I think that is, I gotta say, I think it's fucked again. And I feel like it made me so happy, committed, 1,000% to be in close proximity to people like this again, Yeah.
I'm going
NFTs.
to interrupt because
Oh, yeah.
I'm the type A person who would have ruined that community garden. You need one, but just one of us. Just one of us. No, we will do audience questions in a couple minutes, and there are mics at either end of the aisle, and you can be brave so we can hear your questions. So we'll get started on that. But Clint, you want to carry us home with one more?
Yeah, one more. These always go by so fast, man.
I know they do.
You talk about your dad, or you talk about both your parents.
Yeah.
But I was really struck by the way you talked about your father, and something I think about in my own work and thought about a lot in how the word is passed is this idea that like history isn't static.
Yeah.
And these historical sites that can communicate the history aren't static. Like the way Monticello told the story of Jefferson 20 years ago is not how it tells the story of Jefferson now, and not how it should tell a story about Jefferson now.
Yeah.
These places and the people who run them have the ability to change their relationship to history.
Yeah.
I kept thinking about you and your dad and how it was this profound example of how human relationships aren't static, right? And like what you and your dad's relationship was when you were a kid was very different than what it was when he was on his deathbed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering if just, even briefly, if you could talk a little bit about the arc of that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I love that question, and I think it's exactly right. And it's different than, when he was on his deathbed than it is now. Because I still have a deep and abiding relationship with my father that I'm working on, And, I feel like one of the sweet things about growing up, it feels like, and being in therapy and stuff, is getting aware of how fixed we can be in terms of thinking we understand other people and ourselves, and what a gift it is to be in relationships with curiosity, and to be like, as much as I know you, as much as like you're the person who raised me, and you're the person who came to my games, and you're the person who told me not to do this, or maybe we should do this, and I think I know your story, like I have a million questions for you. And to sort of, in a way, like honor forever that I will always be learning something new about everyone I am close to, about everyone, but especially everyone I'm close to. Which also means that I'll be forever learning stuff newly about myself. And that feels really lucky. And it feels like, again, the older I get, my dad died when he was 58, I'm 48. It feels like a blessing to be at, getting into the decade of his last decade, and to be like, oh, I feel like, I'm getting to know this guy. I'm getting to know this guy. Yeah, that feels important. That feels important. But I never stop wondering, I never stop. And partly too because, there are people, I was just seeing my Aunt Butter in Youngstown, Ohio, who's like 96 or 97. And it's just fun, to hear your elders talk about your elders. It's really,
What's her relationship to him?
she's my dad's aunt. Yeah. And she kind of helped raise him. And it's just,
And he passed.
He died. My dad died in 2004. Yeah.
And I think that's such an important point to talk about. This idea that you're still getting to know him. Through these various spaces and moments.
Yeah, like one of the things about being a child, I think, is that which I think, which we all get to be sometimes, and we catch ourselves, I think. But it's that like if you've had a difficult relationship with someone, like me and my dad had a tough relationship, you think but to get past that thing of thinking and to being like, I wonder why that was. It's just such a relief in a way, like just to sort of be off and walk. In a way, it's because it comes back to the beginning, to be like, oh, I never really valued your heartbreak. Maybe I should do that. Maybe that's a good project. Let me value your heartbreak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody give a round of applause to Ross King. We do have time for some questions. Please don't be shy. Please keep it brief. Please make it a question, not a comment. If you want to espouse your love for Ross, that's great. Do it in the book signing line, but not too long there either. Send him an email, write him a letter. Right now, if you have a question, come on down.
Good job being first.
There you go. Shout out to Deanna.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll just ask one.
Can you step a little closer to the mic?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've noticed that you don't define joy. You define that joy is serious and it's not without pain or sorrow, and other descriptors. But I'm wondering if you think there's a Platonic ideal of joy.
Well done.
To that is, if there
Great question.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. You're right, I don't have a platonic idea of joy. Or like a kind of ideal, like a fixed ideal. I think I would wonder if that was joy. I would wonder if that was joy. You know, because although I don't have a platonic definition or whatever, like a sort of fixed definition of joy, I do think that joy is fundamentally connected to connection. And I wonder if, I mean, in a way you're raising the bar on the question, I think. You're asking, because many things that we probably do get meaning from, you know, are definitely, you know, inflicting harm in various ways. Even things that we might plainly identify as joyful, like you know, good. Elsewhere they might be inflicting harm. So I think you raised the question, you raised the bar a little bit on the question. But my inclination would be that if I don't know that what do you think? What do you think? I'm changing my mind as we speak.
I don't think there can be a platonic ideal of joy because I think there's no platonic ideal of a person. And I guess it's a bit of a. Have you seen The Good Place?
The Good Place?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, never mind. Just that, yeah, I guess how to live an ethical life under late capitalism.
You should watch that show.
Okay.
Yeah.
You should really watch that show. That's your jam.
I don't know. There are things in which I find joy that on a much greater scale have a, you know, ripple effect. Like, in the Book of Delights, there's so many things that you write about that are so simple and so wonderful, and that if you decide to interrogate them down to the, you know, lowest common denominator, it turns out that the T-shirt that the person was wearing was, you know, entangled in layers of harm from where it was made, from the
Totally.
threads it was made from, etc. And I'm not saying my joy is that specific T-shirt that has been made through people's blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
But I suppose how to disentangle the joy we experience from the things it comes with.
Yeah, that's I think that helped me think.
I think I just asked another question.
Well done. Well done. You got a second question in. Good job. I think like a fundamental quality of joy also is like entanglement and understanding that we are entangled. And part of that, and impurity too, is actually, but understanding that we're entangled means also that we will necessarily cause harm to one another. That's just kind of how it is. And I think like, you know, you cut down a tree to make a coffin. But the coffin is to honor and mourn and celebrate and, you know, gather and to come together and to, in fact, practice a kind of entanglement. And there's a way that, you know, being in relationship with the tree itself, which presumably would have rather, you know, continued growing, is also an expression of a kind of entanglement. But that expression of entanglement is also an expression of like, belonging to something other than yourself. I think that's kind of what I'm wondering about. You know, it's a really great question, and I think it also raises the question about like how do we define something like harm or violence in the midst of, like you said, like sort of late capitalism, in the midst of this profound alienating system of life. Versus other systems of life, which are maybe less profoundly alienating. Other systems of life in which, you know, we might have a more direct relationship with one another and the earth, say, you know, in which we would not have to like sort of imagine how the soil matters to us, you know. Great question, well done, beautiful.
All right, we have time for one more.
No, am I the last question?
You're the last one
Oh,
because
man.
we are not
You
clipped.
get applause
We're
too
deep,
for
we're digging
coming
deep.
up, yeah.
My question is, I'm thinking about like the titles of your books
Mm.
and like a larger scheme of things, like Gratitude, Book of Delights, Inciting Joy, Beholding, Behold, I'm going to shrink it. I wonder if you think of these things as distinct things, or if they, you know, like, sure, maybe on one part it's just, I need a different word for this title, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
that's true. But I wonder if you actually do think of them as distinct, and it's not the Book of Joy, it is the Book of Delights, or if they're all like shades of the same color, or something of that sort.
I was going to ask if you think of these as like part of the same, like, is this a trilogy
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like,
yeah. You know, it's funny, like, because I do spend a little bit of time, because I'm asked questions like this, trying to differentiate in some way, or define like the difference between these things. And in a certain kind of way, I feel like delight is its own category in a way, and I feel like gratitude and joy feel more explicitly connected. In a way, like, I feel like gratitude, joy, and love are sort of the kind of trilogy or something like that. In part because I think they're so explicitly, again, connected to connection. Like, I think gratitude is fundamentally an expression of without the beneficence of whatever, you know. It's an expression of being beholden, actually. And joy, I feel like, is very much the same thing. Joy is some kind of when that understanding becomes radiant, you know, that we are in the midst of a kind of holding. And when we practice being part of the holding, that feels like joy. So I do feel like those are very connected. Delight feels though like the one that's a little bit connected, but on the outside, and in a way it feels more fleeting. In a way, delight feels more occasional, actually. Joy and gratitude feel like they're there, and in a way you have to practice getting there. You know, or you have to avail yourself to them and enter them. You know, something like that. Great question.
Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am going to have to call this moment that we are in to a close, but only so we can move on to the next moment, which is our signing. And so we'll all get a little bit of a moment with Ross Gay. Please join me in thanking Clint Smith and Ross Gay for this work. As Clint helpfully pointed out, we do have copies available for sale right out there. If you cannot get one today, please, please, please make sure you check it out from your library. Request it for your holiday list. Give it and share these words. We will be doing a signing line just outside, so let's go. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, man.